The alien marketplace was alive with noise, a place of shadows, fire, and chains. Merchants shouted, guards pushed, and slaves were dragged across a wide stone platform. Creatures from many worlds gathered, their strange eyes hungry for power and control. Here, humans were not seen as people, they were seen as property. And tonight, a new slave was about to be sold. The alien princess, Lady Xylaris, sat in a golden chair above the crowd. Her skin was pale silver, her long hair shimmered like starlight. She wore armor made of crystal plates, glowing softly in the darkness. Her face was calm, proud, and full of authority. She was feared in the marketplace because when she wanted something, she always took it. The crowd grew silent as the slave master brought out the next prize. A tall human man, chained at his wrists and ankles, was dragged onto the stage. His clothes were torn, his body carried scars, but his eyes were sharp. He did not look at the floor like other slaves, he did not beg. Instead, he looked directly at the crowd, as if daring them to buy him. The slave master shouted, "This one is strong, this one is dangerous, this one will not break easily." The aliens in the crowd laughed, some shouted bids, others threw insults. But the human's eyes never lowered. He stood straight, even with chains cutting into his skin. The princess watched him with interest, her sharp eyes narrowing. Something about this human was different, something she could not explain. Bids began to rise. The voices of alien lords filled the air. But when the human suddenly pulled against his chains, the crowd gasped. The guards rushed to strike him, but he only smiled, even as pain burned across his back. He whispered words that only the princess could hear. "You will regret owning me." The words struck her like lightning. Slaves did not speak like that. Slaves begged, obeyed, and died quietly. But this one, this human, carried fire in his voice. The princess felt a strange heat in her chest, a mix of anger and curiosity. She lifted her hand, and the crowd went silent. "I will buy him," she said, her voice cold and commanding. The marketplace froze. No one dared to challenge her bid. The slave master bowed quickly. Chains rattled as the human was dragged forward. The deal was made. The man was now hers. The crowd whispered. Some called her foolish. Others called her cruel. But none would speak louder than a whisper when she was near. The human was brought to her palace that night. He was placed in a chamber with walls of black stone and golden chains. The guards warned him to kneel before his new master. But the human stood tall, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not your servant," he said quietly. The guards gasped, waiting for her rage to explode. But the princess only smiled, a smile without warmth. "You are mine now, human," she said, her voice like ice. "You will obey, or you will suffer." The human did not answer. He only stared. His silence was louder than any scream. That night, the princess could not sleep. She sat alone in her crystal chamber, looking out at the alien sky. Stars burned above her world, but her mind burned with thoughts of him. Why did his words echo in her ears? Why did his eyes challenge her so deeply? She had bought slaves before, hundreds of them, but never had she felt this restless. Never had she felt this unsure. Far away, in the dark chamber, the human sat with chains around his wrists. He did not cry, he did not curse, he only planned. Every link of the chain, every step of the guards, he counted it all. He was waiting for a chance, waiting for the moment when the hunter would become the prey. The princess thought she owned him. The crowd thought she had won. But in truth, something far greater had begun. The auction was over, but the real story was only starting. For this human was not born to kneel. And soon, the proud alien princess would learn the price of buying a man who could never be broken. The silent defiance. The palace of Lady Xylaris was a fortress of crystal towers and burning lights. Guards with armor of living metal walked the halls, and servants bowed low whenever the princess passed. It was a place where her word was law, and no one dared to question her. Yet, inside this place of power, there was one prisoner who refused to bow. The human, still chained, was brought before her throne the next morning. The guards pushed him hard, forcing him to kneel, but he would not fall. His back was straight, his head high, his eyes fixed on hers. It was the same look from the auction, sharp and unbroken. The princess leaned forward on her throne, studying him. Her lips curved into a cold smile, but inside, her mind was uneasy. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice echoing across the great hall. "You are my master now," the human replied, his voice calm. "But your chains cannot touch my spirit." The guards tensed, ready to strike him for his insolence. But with a small wave of her hand, the princess stopped them. His words replayed in her head. "Chains cannot touch my spirit." She wanted to laugh at his pride, yet a strange part of her wanted to believe him. "Serve me well, and you will live," she warned. "Disobey, and you will suffer." The human said nothing, only watching her with those eyes. That silence was louder than 1,000 screams. Over the days that followed, she tested him. She gave him tasks meant to break his will. He was ordered to clean the crystal floors with his bare hands. He was told to carry heavy weapons that even alien guards struggled with. She expected him to collapse, to beg, to finally kneel, but he never begged, never collapsed. He worked, but not as a slave. He worked like a free man trapped in chains. Her servants began to whisper, "This human is strange. He is dangerous. He does not fear her. Why does she not destroy him?" The whispers spread like fire in the palace. Some were afraid, others were jealous, but none understood why their proud princess kept him alive. One evening, she walked into the training hall where he was ordered to spar against alien soldiers. He fought with nothing but his fists, while the others carried weapons. His body bled, his knuckles were bruised, but his eyes burned like fire. He refused to fall, even when struck again and again. When the soldiers raised their blades to finish him, she shouted, "Enough!" Her voice froze the hall, and the soldiers backed away, confused. The human looked at her, blood dripping from his mouth. "You protect me now?" he asked softly. The words stung her pride, for she had not realized what she was doing. Why had she stopped the fight? Why had she saved him? She told herself it was because she did not want her property destroyed. But deep inside, she knew there was another reason, one she dared not speak. That night, she summoned him to her private chamber. He stood in chains before her crystal window, stars shining beyond the glass. "Why do you resist me?" she asked quietly. "Why do you not bow?" The human's voice was steady. "Because I am not yours." The words cut deeper than any blade. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless before another, not because of strength, but because of truth. She dismissed him quickly, hiding the storm in her heart. But when she was alone, she could not escape his voice. Every word, every look, every silence pressed against her like invisible chains. The proud princess who owned empires was being shaken by a man in shackles. The palace continued to whisper. The guards watched him closely, and the other lords began to question her judgment. But she could not bring herself to destroy him. Instead, she watched, she waited, and though she would never admit it, she feared that one day she would no longer be the master in this silent battle. The human had no army, no weapons, and no throne, yet with nothing but defiance in his eyes. He was already winning. The cracks in her power. The palace of Lady Xylaris stood tall, like a mountain of crystal and fire. It was a place where her commands shaped every life within its walls. For years, her people feared her, obeyed her, and never questioned her rule. But now, whispers of change moved through the halls like ghosts. And the cause of this unrest was not a rival lord, nor a foreign army. It was a single human slave, chained but unbroken. The human was given new duties, not as a warrior, but as her personal attendant. He walked close to her, carrying nothing but silence and defiance. Her counsel warned her, "This is dangerous, my lady. He is poison to your name." Yet she kept him near, though she could not explain why. The guards noticed how her eyes followed him. The The servants noticed how she never raised her hand against him, and the lords began to whisper that their proud princess was losing her edge. One evening, during a council meeting, a rival lord insulted her authority. He sneered, "You waste your strength on a slave, a mere human." The court laughed, but the human's hand tightened into a fist. For the first time, Xylaris saw anger in him, not directed at her, but for her. He did not speak, but his stance was like a shield placed before her pride. The rival lord fell silent, uneasy beneath the human's gaze. That night, Xylaris could not stop thinking about it. Why had he stood for her when he owed her nothing? Days later, a sudden threat arrived. Raiders from the outer worlds attacked one of her border outposts. The news came like fire, and her court panicked. But the human only said, "Let me fight." The guards laughed, mocking the idea of a chained slave leading in battle. But Xylaris's voice silenced them all. "Unchain him," she ordered. The hall froze, her words like thunder. The human stepped forward, free for the first time in her palace. His wrists bore scars from the chains, but his spirit was sharper than steel. On the battlefield, he moved with a fury none had seen. With nothing but stolen blades, he cut through enemies as if born for war. When alien raiders surrounded her, he fought beside her, not as property, not as a servant, but as a protector. Their blades clashed, their blood stained the ground. But in the end, it was the human who stood over her, holding back death with his own strength. After the battle, as silence fell, she looked at him differently. Her people saw it too, the way she stared at the human with something more than command, something that looked like respect, or worse, admiration. The lords whispered louder now, "She is weak, she is blinded by a slave." But she ignored them, though deep in her chest, her heart trembled. For she knew the truth she dare not say. Without him, she might have fallen that day. That night, in the quiet of her crystal chamber, she spoke to him alone. "You saved me, though you had no reason," she said softly. The human met her gaze, his voice steady. "I did not save you because you own me. I saved you because I chose to." The words struck like arrows, piercing the armor around her heart. Choice, something no one had ever given her, something she had never given to anyone. She sat in silence long after he left. For the first time in her life, she felt her power cracking, not because she was weaker, but because her heart was no longer her own. And though she tried to deny it, deep inside she knew the truth. The human she bought to obey her was slowly becoming the one she could not control. The forbidden bond. The palace was no longer the same. The air was heavy with whispers, shadows of doubt, and the quiet fear of change. Lady Xylaris, the proud alien princess, once ruled her people with unshaken command. But now, her every step was watched, not with obedience, but with suspicion. And at the center of it all stood the human she once bought in chains. He followed her through the halls, not like a servant, but like an equal. His silence spoke louder than her guards, his eyes stronger than her crown. The servants bowed to her, yet their eyes flicked to him. The lord sneered behind her back, whispering, "She forgets her blood, she bows to a slave." Still, she kept him close, unable to send him away. Though she told herself it was strategy, she knew it was more. At night, she found herself restless. Her mind echoed with the words he once said, "I choose." That simple truth burned her thoughts. She had ruled her entire life through fear and obedience. But this human had given her something she never knew she desired. Respect, freely given, and perhaps something even deeper. One evening, she summoned him to her private garden, a place hidden from the palace eyes, where alien flowers glowed under twin moons. The crystal trees shimmered, the night air hummed softly. He stood before her, no chains, only the weight of silence between them. "Why do you stay near me?" she asked, her voice quieter than ever. "You could escape, you could run." The human looked at her with steady eyes. "Because I do not run from those I care for. The words struck her like fire, and for the first time, her armor of pride cracked. Her heart beat faster, though her mind screamed in warning. This was forbidden, this was impossible. An alien princess and a human slave could not be bound by anything but chains. Her people would never allow it. Her throne would never forgive it. Yet, in that moment, beneath the glowing trees, she felt the truth she could not deny. She no longer wanted his obedience. She wanted his heart. But the palace was not blind. Her council had already begun to move against her. At secret tables, lords whispered plans to strip her of power. They called her weak, corrupted, and unworthy to rule. And in the shadows, spies watched her every word. The bond between her and the human was no longer a secret. It was a weapon her enemies would use to destroy her. The next day, a banquet was held for visiting nobles. The hall was filled with laughter, but beneath it ran venom. One of the rival lords stood, raising a glass. "Tell us, princess, is it true? Do you keep a human not as a slave, but as something more?" The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to her. Her blood turned to ice. Her pride battled her fear. Before she could answer, the human stepped forward, his voice calm, sharp as a blade. "I am no one's slave." Gasps filled the hall. Guards reached for their weapons. But the princess raised her hand, stopping them. She looked at him, and in that moment, she knew there was no return. The bond was no longer a shadow. It was truth. Truth that could destroy her throne. Truth that could burn her kingdom. But it was also the first truth she had ever chosen for herself. That night, alone in her chamber, she whispered words she never thought she could say. "I do not want your chains," she said softly, staring at him. "I want your choice." For a moment, the silence between them felt endless. Then, slowly, the human stepped closer, and in his eyes, she saw no fear, no hatred, only the same fire that had once defied her. But now, it was a fire that answered her own. The forbidden bond had begun, and though it would cost her crown, her power, perhaps even her life, the alien princess no longer cared. For the human she once bought had become the only thing her heart could not live without. The revolt of shadows. The palace no longer felt like hers. Once, Lady Xylaris walked its halls as a queen of fire, unchallenged and untouchable. Now, every corner carried whispers, every shadow held doubt. The bond she shared with the human was no longer a secret. It had spread across the empire like wildfire, and with it came danger. The lords gathered in silence, their faces hidden by dark hoods. In secret chambers, they planned her downfall. She is no longer fit to rule. One spat. "She bows to a slave. She has lost her blood's honor." Another hissed. They spoke of tradition, of power, of fear. But beneath their words was one truth. They wanted her throne, and the human was their excuse to take it. One night, their plan came alive. A revolt sparked in the outer districts of her city. Fires burned through the streets, soldiers clashed, and banners of rebellion rose against her. The lords called it justice, but it was nothing more than a hunger for power. From her tower, Xylaris watched the flames. Her people cried out for safety, but her council demanded her surrender. "Give up the human," they shouted. "Prove your loyalty to your throne." Her heart twisted, but her answer was firm. "No." The human stood at her side, his hands ready for war. "You do not need to protect me," he said. But she shook her head, her silver hair glinting in the firelight. "It is not you I protect," she whispered. "It is what you mean to me." When the rebels broke through the palace gates, the night turned into a storm of steel and blood. Alien soldiers clashed in the halls. Screams echoed through crystal walls. The Lord sent assassins to her chamber, hoping to kill both her and the human. But they had underestimated him. With blades in his hands, the human fought like a storm. He cut down enemies who had trained their whole lives for war. Every strike was precise, every move born of survival. For years he had suffered chains, and now, in freedom, he was unstoppable. By her side, he shielded Xylaris from every blade that came close. When her guards fell, he stood. When her walls cracked, he did not. And though blood ran down his arm, he smiled. "This is where I choose to stand," he said. Her chest ached, not with fear, but with something deeper. In that moment, she realized her enemies had been right. She had changed, but they were wrong to call it weakness. For what she felt now was strength she had never known. The battle raged until dawn. The palace floors were painted with the blood of traitors. Yet the cost was heavy. Many loyal guards lay silent. The lords who survived fled into the night, swearing to return with greater force. The city smoldered, its people shaken, and the throne of Xylaris was no longer safe. Standing in the ruins of her once glorious hall, she looked at the human, his body scarred, his eyes steady. "You should leave," she whispered. "If you stay, they will never stop hunting us." But he shook his head. "I did not fight beside you to walk away." His words carried no fear, no hesitation. Only choice, only truth. And in that truth, she felt the last wall of her pride collapse. The revolt had taken her power. Her throne stood on the edge of ruin. But it had also given her something greater, a bond forged not by chains, not by command, but by blood, battle, and love. The revolt of shadows was not the end. It was only the beginning. For now, the empire itself would rise against her, and the princess who once ruled with fear would face a war not for her crown, but for the heart she had chosen. The breaking of chains. The revolt had ended, but the silence it left behind was heavier than war. The palace of Lady Xylaris stood broken, its towers scarred with fire. The banners of her enemies had been torn down, yet the whispers remained. The lords who escaped spread lies across the empire. They told the people their princess had betrayed her blood, that she loved a human more than her throne. And for the first time, her crown trembled. Xylaris sat alone in the throne hall, its crystal pillars cracked. The weight of her empire pressed against her shoulders. Once, her voice alone could command armies. But now, even her council hesitated to obey. They looked at the human beside her, not with respect, but with hatred. To them, he was not a protector, not a warrior. He was the chain pulling their ruler down. Late at night, she found herself wandering to the human's chamber. There, he sat sharpening a blade, the firelight dancing across his face. He looked up, calm as always, his scars like stories carved into his skin. "You should rest," he said, but she shook her head. Her voice trembled, something rare for her. "Do you regret staying?" The human studied her for a long moment before answering. "No, because this is where I choose to be." The words cut through her walls, and she felt her pride shatter. For years, she had lived surrounded by power. She had ruled by fear, demanded obedience, and crushed rebellion. But here was a man who owed her nothing, a man who had every reason to hate her. Yet he stood with her, bled for her, and chose her. Not because of chains, not because of fear, but because of his own will. Her chest tightened, and for the first time in her life, the princess, known for her coldness, whispered words she had never spoken before. "I do not want your service," she said softly, her silver eyes glistening. "I want your heart." The human froze, his hand still on the blade. Her voice broke as she stepped closer. "I cannot rule without you. I cannot breathe without you. Stay, not as my slave, but as my equal." The chamber fell silent, the words hanging in the air like a storm. Never before had she begged. Never before had she lowered her pride. But now, before a human, she was willing to break. The human placed the blade aside and rose slowly. His eyes met hers, sharp and steady as always. "You finally speak the truth," he said quietly. For a moment, her heart feared rejection. But then, his hand reached for hers, rough and scarred. And in that touch, she felt freedom stronger than any throne. When dawn rose, the council stormed into the hall. They demanded her answer. Choose her throne, or choose the human. The lords had gathered armies outside the city. War drums echoed across the land. The empire stood on the edge of collapse. But Xylaris stood tall, her hand still holding the humans. And with a voice that carried through the broken hall, she declared, "I will not give him up. If my throne falls, it will fall with me, standing beside the one I choose." The council gasped, some shouted, others stormed away. The news spread across the empire in flames. The alien princess had broken the oldest law of her people. She had chosen love over power, a human over her crown. The armies outside sharpened their blades. The rebels prepared for war. And yet, in the heart of the storm, Xylaris felt something she had never felt before. She was free. The breaking of chains had begun, not of iron or steel, but of pride, of fear, of the walls that had caged her heart. And though the empire itself now stood against her, she no longer stood alone. The love that changed kingdoms. The empire stood on the edge of war. The lords had gathered their armies, banners of rebellion flying high under the burning sky. They marched not only to claim the throne, but to erase the shame they believed their princess had brought upon them. For to love a human was, in their eyes, the greatest betrayal. Inside the broken palace, Lady Xylaris prepared for the storm. Her crystal throne was cracked, her council divided, her crown uncertain. Yet she stood stronger than ever, not because of fear, not because of her title, but because of the human who stood at her side. He sharpened no chains, for there were none left. He carried only his will, his fire, and his choice. The guards who remained loyal looked at him with new eyes, some with doubt, some with respect, but all could not deny the truth. They had seen him bleed for their princess. They had seen him fight when others fled, when the first drums of war shook the earth. The lords sent a message to the palace gates. "Give us the human, and we will spare your throne." The council begged her to accept. They cried, "Your rule depends on this sacrifice, my lady." But Xylaris raised her head, her silver hair catching the light. Her voice thundered, "If my rule depends on betrayal, then I do not deserve to rule." The armies came like a flood. Towers of fire lit the sky. War machines shattered the crystal walls. The palace groaned under the weight of battle. And yet, within the chaos, Xylaris and the humans stood together, back to back, blade to blade. Every strike was defiance. Every breath was survival. The alien princess who once bought a slave now fought beside him as an equal. Their enemies called it weakness, but in truth, it was strength beyond measure. As the night dragged on, their bond became a weapon. When she faltered, he held her ground. When he bled, she shielded his path. And in that rhythm, they became more than warrior and ruler. They became legend. By dawn, the battlefield was silent. The lords who survived knelt in disbelief. Their armies broken, their pride shattered. They had marched to destroy her for loving a human. But instead, they had witnessed a love that could not be chained, a love that had stood against armies and refused to fall. The people of the empire gathered in the streets. They whispered of what they had seen, not a princess weakened by a human, but a princess strengthened by him. Some called it rebellion against tradition. Others called it destiny. But all agreed the old ways could no longer hold power. Xylaris walked through her city with the human at her side. Her crown no longer a symbol of fear, but of choice, of change. She did not call him servant. She did not call him slave. She called him partner. And though many still doubted, though enemies still lurked in shadows, the truth was clear. The chains that once bound humans had been broken. The chains that once caged her heart had been shattered. And in their place stood something greater. The alien princess who once bought a human to obey her had ended up begging him for love. And that love did not only change her. It changed kingdoms. It changed history. It proved that no empire, no law, no chain could defeat the power of choice. And in that choice, humanity had risen.